I have bad news, Chelsea. We totally screwed up the review of the DJI Pocket 3. I just totally underestimated it.
We did. We didn't really know what we were dealing with.
I thought this was like a gadget. Some new creator was thinking about starting up a TikTok or something. You might get this for him for Christmas. Then I saw the footage from it. And I saw the footage and I was like, oh my God, this is totally professional, and I can't believe it was $550 and this size. But the workflow, the usability, the video quality, the fact that the audio was fantastic, I think it's an absolute game changer, and it made me step back and evaluate the whole camera wars thing and evaluate DJI as a real competitor, and should I be considering DJI in the same category as Canon and Sony and Nikon? And I absolutely should. They are a big threat to all the existing camera companies. I think they're going to completely upend the industry. I think it's a very important topic to talk about.
Okay, well, we're going to get into that and the history of DJI and why we think they could really disrupt the camera market. But first, we want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Squarespace. Whether you need a website, store, or portfolio, it's so easy to make it happen on Squarespace, and you need one. If you have a restaurant or if you're doing any kind of service, you need a place where people can come to your website and learn all about you and see that you're professional and put together. So don't delay in getting one today. Go to squarespace.com/Chelsea. You can get a 14-day free trial, and when you decide that you want to keep it, use the coupon code Chelsea to get 10% off. And I beg of you, because I'm so tired of going to a service or a restaurant or a store I want to go to, and they don't have a website at all. It makes me go somewhere else.
Yeah, and you're lucky to find them at all.
Yeah.
First, let's quickly talk about this Pocket 3 here. This is a vlogging camera. It's a creator camera, but the form factor is not like what we're accustomed to here. The gimbal itself is built in, which means it's stabilized, but it's not just for walking shots. You can just set it on a table, in which case the tripod is basically built in and you don't have to go fussing with a head to make small adjustments. It'll just track your face.
It's small and compact enough that when you showed me that we were going to be reviewing it, I figured it would just be very mediocre. The average person might use it for vacation, or someone might use it as a B camera if they're traveling and they didn't care about the quality of the footage that much. But the tracking is so smooth, and the built-in gimbal and the 4K 60 video ended up looking beautiful.
Oh, and the fact that this wireless mic here was just as good as our big Rode mics, and you don't need a wire or a separate connection. All the connections are built in.
And you kept saying, I can see the screen in the bright sunlight, Chelsea.
As obvious as that seems, I cannot do that with my expensive cameras. And then I got the footage back, and it was so amazing. It was like full HDR and just as sharp as my Sony at like 1/10 the price, the size, and the weight. But we reviewed the very first version of that, the very first Osmo, and remember Toby?
Toby and Christina were here. We were doing the burger challenge, trying to get the best photos of a burger. It was a fun video, but you tried to use the first version of the Pocket Osmo, and you were having trouble connecting it to your phone. It wasn't working right. You were frustrated.
There was so much swearing.
There was a lot of...
Because it did not work well at all.
Toby.
And that's why I hadn't reviewed anything since that, until DJI reached out and said, hey, you should check this out. And usually if a company reaches out, it's because they have some confidence about it. So I said yes. But after I published the video, I read the comments, and people kept saying, why didn't you compare it to the Sony ZV-1 cameras, which are Sony's vlogging cameras? And I realized it's because I didn't think that they were the same, because they didn't look the same. But the fact of the matter is they served the same function.
Yeah, I think that was so interesting. Thank you all for keeping us in check and asking us, but it's the form factor, and I think the fact that we weren't taking this as seriously as a professional tool. But I think mostly the form factor and the brand is what it got us hung up on, not comparing these two things.
Right. If
it was a mistake.
Canon had released this, I definitely would have compared it to the
Right.
Sony, but I don't think of DJI as being in that category. But that's my own personal bias. And whenever I uncover something like that, I'm going to attack it and try to eliminate it. And that's what brought me down this process. I started to reflect and thought, why did I miss it? And how do I need to reevaluate DJI in the context? So I want to start by first taking a little bit better look at DJI, who they are, what they're making so that we can figure out where they're going and what's going to be happening in the future.
I think that before we even assess DJI, we can compare them to other companies that we've seen before.
You might just have to establish like, oh, these giants can fall. Like Canon and Nikon could fall because it has happened before.
Yeah, yes, that's exactly the point I'm trying to make. So if you look at American companies that have done really well in photography, you think of Kodak, you think of Polaroid, and these companies had a straight up monopoly. No one else was making film because they had patents and they were litigious and they were blocking everyone else out of the market.
Oh, the real American business model, right?
Yeah.
Patents, invent, patent,
Sue.
and then sue.
Yeah, but it was working. And this is the craziest part. Kodak invented the digital camera. And they didn't bring it to market because if that became popular, it would have messed up the sales of their film. And that was their bread and butter. That's where they were making their money. So they had this new technology that was the future, and they threw it away because they needed to make profits in the moment.
But there were outside disruptors in this, right?
Right.
After World War II ended, Americans came into Japan and we brought a lot, including a lot of our business and manufacturing experience, as well as connections, as well as an invitation into the American market.
Right, and Fuji tried to break in and they were met with a lot of these patents and they couldn't get their film sold here, but eventually they did break through, and when they did, they disrupted the market. They disrupted Kodak and Polaroid and they displaced them. Look at them now. Now, film and Polaroids is a huge part of Fujifilm's business. But our bigger point is that it's happened before. This continues to happen. History repeats itself and giants can fall. And I see some of that with Sony, Nikon, Canon, these old DSLR, now mirrorless companies. They're competing on a very old model. And they're doing that same thing where they're refusing to bring the digital camera of today to market for fear of cannibalizing their current sales. So that puts DJI in an interesting position. So let's talk about DJI's history a little bit, because they're such a new company compared to these other Japanese camera companies or European ones like Leica, Hasselblad, which is now DJI. Anyway, they started in 2013.
Well, wait, Canon and Nikon started over 100 years ago.
Yeah.
So DJI is 10 years old?
Wait, yeah.
That's crazy to think about, right?
They're a little baby. Yeah.
They are.
But they started with the Phantom drone. We had that, remember?
Yeah, because I was into like these little Trex helicopters that were super hard to fly, and there's no way you could put a camera on one of these things. But this Phantom came with a little like action camera attachment, GoPro. It was just because it was only GoPro. Yeah. And I stuck my GoPro in there and it made like super wavy, shaky footage. It was absolute garbage. And that drone was very flaky and unreliable.
You loved it. You're such an early adopter.
Yeah, I really am.
You are. And you loved it, but it had shaky footage. It left a lot to be desired. There's a lot of room for growth. They had the DJI Phantom with a built-in camera by 2014.
Yeah, the very next year, DJI expanded from just drones to making their own cameras. And guess what? That camera was terrible. It was absolutely appalling. So everybody just kept sticking their GoPros on their Phantoms. Up until about the Phantom 3, and then we were like, okay, it's as good as a GoPro. And look where DJI is now and where GoPro is now. We'll get to that more in a little bit.
But they had the DJI Ronin gimbal come out. And then you start to see what they're doing, right? They have a drone and they put someone else's camera on it. They realize that they need the camera. Then they have the drone and the camera with the built-in gimbal, and they're like, we have gimbal technology. We can sell the gimbal. They're continuing to spread out their line of products in a really smart way.
Right. And so at that time, they'd make a gimbal, and then you'd put your Canon 70D or something on it. You'd put your Sony camera on it. Guess what? I think DJI wants everything that's in your hand.
They want it all.
So in 2015, they released that first Osmo. That's the one we used with Toby that we absolutely hated. But it was a gimbal with their own built-in camera. So now they had the whole thing in the hand, but it just didn't work very well because it was their first gen. And because at this point, they're a 2-year-old company, basically, well, 2 years since their first product. And then in that same year, another product we bought, they released the Zenmuse X5, a micro four thirds interchangeable lens camera. And that was slung to the bottom of their big, huge drone, usually, something that we also bought for like $6,000. we mostly used it to fly a pizza with that one time.
Yeah, that was what you do with it.
Yeah. So they had that high-end gear. They were starting to develop interchangeable lens camera experience, but they also shrunk their drones down. And they released the Mavic in one of the most savage WWE-style wrestling victories we've ever seen. Do you remember? GoPro had been building up to launching their own drone.
And GoPro was kind of flailing a little bit because everyone was making knockoff GoPros, so their business was struggling. They were going to come in with the drone and have a new product.
What was that founder's name again?
Nick Woodman.
I remember him going up on stage, and he had a whole backpack, and he pulled out this drone that was the smallest at the time out of his backpack and unfolded it. And it was smaller than the Phantom, which was the only drone we really had. But then DJI, like maybe a day before, it was all at Photokina, like a day before, DJI pulls out their Mavic, and it's like a third the size and so much better. And they just slam GoPro to the ground like, oh, those are all your hopes and dreams are pinned on this? Bam, we're 5 times better.
They ate their lunch.
Oh, it was so heartbreaking.
Do you think that that was enough for them? No, because a few years later,
No.
they also made an action cam. So it was like,
Yeah, they made the Osmo action camera just to drive that stake into DJI.
well, we see how they've competed with DJI, but what I find exciting and also scary is that they bought Hasselblad in 2017.
How did everybody not their own pants? How was Canon and Nikon like, we just saw what you did to GoPro, and then you bought Hasselblad? Hasselblad, the company that put the camera on the moon, that makes like 100 megapixel medium format. This savage company that dismantled GoPro, just limb by limb,
Yeah.
suddenly jumped into their own industry, and they did not flinch. They were just standing in a room like the end of Reservoir Dogs, just Fuji, Canon, Nikon, Olympus, all pointing guns at each other.
They're like,
not knowing this monster was in the background about to bite all their heads off.
Yeah, they were just like, I have 30 megapixels. I have 32. Terrifying. I think what that tells us is that they are taking imaging really seriously, even though they're primarily video and drones, and that we should be keeping an eye on them. And you see this with the Ronin 4D, the full frame camera. Like, they're moving into this segment more seriously.
Yeah, so the Ronin 4D takes their gimbal experience, mounts a super lightweight camera on the front of it, and it's full frame, and they have their own DL lenses, or they can use everybody else's lenses. It can use laser autofocus, and it can use that laser autofocus to manually focus even manual cinema lenses.
It literally has laser autofocus?
Yeah, it's got a little unit mounted on top of it that mounts, what, you don't have your Sony laser autofocus? No, because they're actually like inventing stuff that sounds kind of scary. This is why I am absolutely convinced they're going to completely flip the table and just turn the whole industry over and just do to all these Japanese camera companies what they did to GoPro.
I'm excited and I'm scared.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about what DJI has done so far, but we also need to talk about where we think they're going. What is their secret plan, so to speak? And we're going to talk about that soon, but first we want to thank our sponsor, Squarespace.
First, I want to share a secret, and it is how to actually have people find you with whatever your work is, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're a photographer, if you're a videographer, people are going to go to Google. That's what they do, and they type like photographer near me. And do you think Google goes to Instagram and has some algorithm to find whose pictures are the best? And then no. Google uses text-based searches to look at all the websites, like real websites. That's why you need a real website with your own custom domain. You can go to squarespace.com/Chelsea, and you'll set up a website. You'll drag your pictures in. You'll pick your fonts, your logos, your colors. You'll build your brand around it. But you'll also set up search engine optimization by putting certain keywords in. And those are the things that Google is going to find that are going to put you at the top of the results. Even in Google Maps, like that's how Google's going to get your address. That's how they're going to get the website link. All of this comes together because you have your own website. That's why it is such a fundamental part of doing any kind of business.
You know how many times I find people's social media from their website? Because I like to check out both. If we're hiring a company to do work on our house, I look for their website. Are they competent enough to have one? If we're looking at a new restaurant, I look at their website to see if they keep their specials up to date, if they're doing any exciting events, and then I go to their social media. But your website is so crucial to keeping your business current and to keeping new customers coming in. So get your Squarespace today. Stop hesitating. Go to squarespace.com/Chelsea and use the coupon Chelsea to get 10% off. And that is CHELSEA. You have to use my name. I'm not playing with you guys. All right, let's talk about DJI's secret plan.
Yeah, the bell has rung. There's a bit of a moment in the big fight, and they're huddling with their coaches in the corner, and they're about to go back out. We're about to see the next round. Here's a little bit of nerdy business terminology.
Okay.
Vertical expansion. Now, first we'll contrast it with horizontal expansion. Canon has been doing horizontal expansion. They made cameras for many years, and they thought, we want to expand the business, so they started making sensors and lenses for medical equipment, right? They're taking their existing experience and moving into completely different fields. DJI had a different strategy. They were just made flying things, and then they expanded vertically until it was flying cameras, and then it was gimbals. They're moving vertical throughout the entire industry, but they have not filled in all the gaps yet. So I think they're going to start filling in some of those remaining gaps that will allow them to have complete vertical dominance over the entire industry.
I think that their next step is going to be, they have the cinema, the very high-end cinema camera, and they have something like the Osmo. I think they're going to fill in the middle and make a video camera that's something we would use more often.
Right.
It's something like the average YouTuber would use, and as a professional.
Right, and I think that will require them to expand their full-frame lens lineup. They'll probably use their Hasselblad expertise to make really high-quality, lightweight lenses.
Well, that's the thing. When they bought Hasselblad, we saw them slap the name on their drone, and we were like, oh, I had initially thought they wanted the name just to make their gear look more reputable. Like, we'll just say this is a Hasselblad lens on our drone, and it's going to seem like it's the best lens. Now I'm realizing they bought the intellectual property as well. They know how to make these high-quality lenses, and that can go into their stills line. So they already have the information. It's just a matter of implementing it.
And building up optical expertise, like the ability to grind those lenses and to design those lenses, that took Japan multiple generations. They also actually still maintain like the Swedish Hasselblad facilities and expertise. So they do have that. And that is how you suddenly become a powerhouse in imaging without having to wait multiple generations, is you just suddenly acquire it. Because keeping in mind, DJI is 10 years old, but they brought in like 100 years of Hasselblad experience suddenly.
I also think that they're going to use that medium format Hasselblad technology to just compete with full frame still cameras at a reasonable price. So I think that a DJI just straight up camera is on the horizon.
Yeah, I was actually surprised how competitively priced the X2D 100C that we reviewed was, considering it had a terabyte of internal storage, something none of my other cameras have. Considering like the amazing simple user interface, something none of our other cameras have. And I haven't yet bought one, but I really want one. So it's like the only piece of my bag that's not DJI right now is I still use Sony cameras, but my gimbal is DJI, my drone is DJI.
Well, maybe chill a little bit, because we got to keep multiple companies in business. So just calm down. All right, here's our next point is, what do you think the other brands will do to compete? Do you think it's possible for them? I feel like when I think of OM system, Fujifilm and Nikon, they're in this more, well, they're headed kind of vintage, right? Nikon just came out with 2 vintage cameras. Of course, they're doing like higher level professional stuff. OM systems, they are owned by JIP now, and they seem to just be doing like minor updates, but keeping with that vintage cool look they had. And then Fujifilm, of course, most of their money comes from Instax, their film, their instant cameras, but everybody loves the X series, X100 series.
Mm-hmm. And they all do video.
Yeah.
But when you look at the design, when you look at the lenses, video is clearly secondary to stills. They're still primarily stills cameras. They do not have, none of those companies have dedicated video cameras.
Well, Nikon tried to do the little action camera. What was it called? The Keystone?
Key Mission?
Oh, Key Mission. And I think it was just like too little too late.
Yeah.
And then I didn't really see any more exciting video stuff from them. So I think you're right. They're primarily stills. And I think that they're just very like traditional photography brands.
But everything is video right now, right?
Yeah.
Like even if you go to Instagram and you look up photographers, what you find are photographers making videos about
pictures.
taking stills.
Yeah, or
there's no good place to share stills anymore. Like that entire format is gone. People used to send pictures back and forth to each other. They post pictures on Facebook, and more that is just videos, video clips, short video clips.
so, but the brands that are adapting to this more are like Canon and Panasonic. They make a lot of video-centric gear. Canon has their entire cinema line, but one problem with them is that they're always artificially limiting their lower-end video stuff to not compete with their very high-end stuff.
Oh, it sounds a lot like Kodak.
It does, right? It
Yes.
sounds just like they're like holding the digital camera, but they won't do it. And Panasonic is not exclusively stills. They focus on video, but they also have stills cameras.
Yeah.
So they're more thinking about video, but I feel like they're still in this very traditional spot.
And then you have Sony, who they're the second youngest company in this field besides DJI, but also the fast moving. Like they have covered a lot of ground in just a couple of decades. They have a cinema lineup. They have stills cameras. They have the FX series, which is cinema cameras. They have the Alpha series, which are stills first, but also do video. And then they have the ZV series of cameras that can be either fixed lens like this or the ZVE cameras that have interchangeable lenses. They make their own microphones. They actually make their own drone, competing with DJI kind of directly. They make action cameras. They make pocket cameras. They even make smartphones with like very good cameras built into them.
So the smartphone technology is what makes me think that Sony could be the best competition for DJI. We have an entire podcast on Sony's secret plan, and we talk about how the software and the technology that they're putting into their phones could be a glimpse at the future of their cameras. So I recommend watching that. But I also think that that's going to be the type of technology that keeps DJI in check. They'll be able to compete with them a bit.
Yeah, I think assuming we're right about that and they do switch to an Android-based platform, they will be able to compete in the future, which is going to be very software-based. The main benefit of the platform isn't you getting Instagram notifications on your camera, it's that the software developers at Sony will be able to innovate faster because they won't be burdened by writing code for their existing outdated camera platforms. And that's really the level that DJI is playing at. Like a lot of what makes this better are things like the active track face tracking. Like a lot of the benefits of all of this is software based. And Sony seems to be the only one that is well positioned for it. I want to say that this is life or death because I have a flair for the dramatic.
You're dramatic.
But the fact of the matter is when you talk about Japanese companies, they don't really die. Like there's literally a business term called zombie company because Japanese companies will just sort of stay alive forever, even if they're not doing anything innovative or making profit.
Yeah, they feel an obligation to keep people employed, which is nice. And like Olympus didn't go out of business; it was sold to JIP.
Pentax is still technically doing stuff.
Yeah, and there's something nice to that. That means that they're not disappearing. But what will happen if things change so rapidly because of a new company like DJI?
I think it could shift very quickly. We saw our own vlogging market go from Canon to Sony like very rapidly. And the shift to DJI with things like this could also happen overnight. You know why? Because vloggers like us, we're getting it, we're reviewing it, we're seeing the stuff in real time, and we have sponsors, we have a budget, so we can shift like in a few months. There can be a wave of people shifting. As soon as somebody makes something that's a little bit more efficient, it can take over.
You're already talking about putting an imaginary DJI camera in your bag. And it doesn't even exist yet. Oh my gosh, you're crazy.
I'm actually ahead of the bleeding edge.
You are. You're in some imaginary bleeding edge. Well, what do you think about DJI versus Sony? Because it seems like most YouTubers are using Sony now. They're super popular with young people. They've diversified a lot. And their cinema cameras are way ahead with Sony.
Well, Sony wins with smartphones. With drones, Sony competes there, but DJI is way, way, way ahead. With cinema cameras, Sony, way ahead. DJI has one thing, but it's young and they don't have many lenses. Also, Sony has Sony Pictures. We forget that Sony is not just a camera manufacturer, but this massive conglomerate with their fingers in everything.
They're huge, but there's something nimble about being small. DJI is only 10 years old, and look how far they've come.
Right.
And like I was talking about with the big old American companies, once you get so big, it's difficult to change gears because you don't want to give up what's working.
The segment that they're fighting over now is the consumer sort of vlogging video creator market. And I do want to take a second and just compare the design of the two cameras made by these two companies to fulfill the same market.
I think it's interesting. You see their history and the design.
Yeah, so this is the Sony ZV-1. It is their vlogging camera. And you can see, just like their other cameras, if you want to see yourself, the screen flips out from the side here. But the screen itself, you can't see it in the sun, right? It's too dim. Also, it's set way back from the lens. Like, why is it so far back, making it hard to see? And if you're over on this side, then the lens is in the way of the screen. Like, the positioning doesn't make any sense. If you want to hook up a wireless mic, which you really need to, you can get this separate Sony gadget, which costs even more money, and then you put it in the hot shoe, which used to be for flashes, but is now for mics. It's many different components that all sort of plug in together, and you're right, reflects its history. But this DJI thing does all of this, like same size 1-inch sensor, believe it or not. Same f2 lens as the ZV-1F, I think it's called, a different particular model. But the screen here is on the front. And instead of flipping the screen forward, if you want to film yourself, you just push this 3 times and then the camera rotates around. But here's the clincher. If you want vertical video, like, have you heard of TikTok or Instagram stories? Like 90% of the content that people consume now is vertical because we hold our phones vertical. With the DJI, you just flip the screen vertical. And it reads the video from the sensor in kind of a novel way. So it gives you 3K vertical video. With this, if you want to go vertical, well, like, how would you even do it? A separate
Cage.
bracket or a cage or something. And now you've added yet another gadget to accomplish something that is absolutely just fundamental and should be taken for granted by anybody buying these cameras. Yeah, so as creators with so much history in the industry, we felt comfortable assembling this rig because that's what we'd always been doing. But if you are 19 and you're just setting up a new channel, this looks absurd and antiquated. This looks hacked together, whereas this looks like, obviously, this is what it should be.
We
it's
have
all
to
integrated.
show them both to our daughter and see which one she likes.
Oh, I think I know what's going to happen, especially when you try to transfer files to your phone. Because, can I say, this one will transfer files at about 9 megabits per second. This one, 250. That's based on my own test.
Whoa.
So it's like 25, 30 times faster.
It's way faster.
Which means this one was unusable. You need to pull the memory card out, put it into a memory card reader, connect that to your phone, transfer it. With this one, you just transfer the video files and it's done in a few seconds.
It sounds like you think DJI is going to win this imaginary competition here.
No, I absolutely don't, because I think Sony's next big move is going to be big and Android based. If it's not, then Sony's in a lot of trouble. But I do want to hear from everybody else. Who do you think is going to win? Does the young Chinese upstart have a chance? Are politics going and sanctions going to be a factor in the widespread adoption of DJI? I don't know the answer to that. I want to hear what people think.
Yeah, I'm curious to hear what you all think too. And I want to take a moment to thank you all for watching and to thank Squarespace for making this podcast possible. If you want to check out your own website at Squarespace, or if you just even want to support what we're doing here and just take a look, go to squarespace.com and make your own trial website. You can see how easy it is. You can see how professional it makes you look, and it's free for 14 days. And if you decide to buy it, use the coupon code Chelsea to get 10% off. Thanks, Squarespace.
Bye.